Hello. So finally, after knight f3 6, main Sicilians, we um, are in the Taimanov variation, probably the main. At least there is a biggest amount of theory of all other lines like Paulsen and Rublevsky variation. Here in Taimanov, it's really a lot. By the way, I don't know if many of you know that Taimanov was on top of being a very strong grandmaster. He was playing candidate matches, for instance. Uh, by the way, he played against Robert James Fisher, the candidate match. It didn't end very well for him, but still, he was a very strong player, professional, very strong player. But in the same time, he was actually a professional pianist also, and a very good one. I remember that once I bought a recording of like one piece of 100 best duets in the world. So when male and female pianists are playing together, and actually one piece was from Taimanov. He was playing with Brooke, I think the female pianist. So he was, well, I mean, considered to be in top 100 best ever pianist, duet pianist. So a serious person. Yeah, I mean nowadays quite difficult to find such examples. But in any case, I think he liked very much playing this system. That's why it was called after him. Well, what can I say? Here you have to get ready if you want to play with black the system. You have to get ready to tough work. There is a lot of theory. It's a bit confusing. I mean, to play it with black, I find it not extremely rational. Even if in general it's a very serious solid system, but frankly, white has a very wide choice of options, and quite many of them are rather dangerous. I mean, usually, let's say neither, which we are going to check later, uh, most of white's options are quite harmless. You just need to know the theory, and that's it. White has nothing here. There are many variations which, where black has to still fight for equality. So for white, I consider it's quite nice to play against Taimanov because you choose. You want a positional system, aggressive, very aggressive, and almost everywhere white has chances to get a certain advantage, even though of course black is holding in general is holding the whole spectrum of the theory. But yeah, again, be ready if you want to play it with black. Be ready that you will have quite a number of maybe small, not tragic, but quite a number of problems here and there, which you will have to solve. But again, a very serious system, of course. So today, during this lesson, I want to introduce you all other moves than bishop e3. Definitely bishop e3 is the most popular, and it's the main, nowadays at least, is the main weapon, and it's very dangerous also. Maybe the most dangerous move. So that will be the next lesson. But now let's go through all other systems. To start with, of course, knight db5 is given nothing because after queen b8, white is not in time, as sometimes happens, in Sicilian, that white sometimes can manage to get bishop f4 or to attack, but here nothing. Black will just play a6 next, and white knight will retreat. So this doesn't make any sense to play knight db5. Lately, queen d3 became a very strange move, frankly, but it's not so easy as most of the other moves. Even though I don't think it gives an advantage, but it's perfectly playable for white, and there is not so much theory after queen d3. So what are the options? The idea is that in case of a6, white wants just to take on c6 and bc queen g3, a very typical idea in this variation, or maybe dc, because bc queen g3 is probably a bit better for white. Dc queen g3, same idea. I don't know if after takes e5, if it's anything really special for white, but of course he should be a bit better, yeah, because of the h line and this potential b6 square, which is a little bit weak, but maybe black can, with accurate play, can equalize here. Then another option is to take on d4, which looks also logical because you're sort of gaining a tempo. Queen takes on d4 after playing queen d3, but still a6, bishop e3, b5, and now whether f3 or bishop e2, not so easy to equalize here with black, because in the f4 variation you will have the same position with white's pawn on f4 often, but it's not clear if it's not better on f3. I mean, it's not better on f2 and then to play f3, because with f4 then e4 pawn becomes vulnerable pretty often. But I think there is quite a solid weapon, which is knight f6, well, by the way, the most, of course, logical move. And now white's idea is knight db5, otherwise queen d3 doesn't make sense. Knight db5, queen b8, queen g3. This is the point. So now d6 is played, bishop e3, a6, knight d4. Yes, white lost some tempis, of course, playing knight db5, knight d4. Well, actually, probably only one tempi, 1.5, because queen will most probably come back to c7 at some point, even though, yeah, not necessarily. But in return, white managed his queen to g3. I think now it starts to remind this position more Rouser variation than Taimanov, but it's playable for black. I don't think white is better. It's just a complicated game. Let's say bishop d7, long castle. Well, usually here white should already try to play for long castle. b5, take on c6, f3, b4, knight e2, a5. Let's say knight d4, bishop d7, followed by a4. Yeah, you will see there are some quite similar positions in Rouser can appear here. I think black has a good version, because again white lost some tempi with knight b5, knight d4, and I believe it's complicated position, but yeah, I believe black is fine here. So that would be my recommendation against queen d3 for black. Then what else? There is a3 move. Actually, it's not so easy for black. Actually, it's quite serious move. But in any case, what I would advise you, I decided to show it to you in this lesson. But it's probably better to start with bishop e3 if you want to play a3 system, because after bishop e3, as you will see during the next lesson, black should play a6, because knight f6 here. This variation white can still, by the way, transpose with a3, but here f4 seems to be really bothering black. In nowadays state of theory, black is experiencing quite some problems after f4. So then you would rather, I would suggest you play bishop e3, a6, a3. Because here after knight f6, actually the f4 system is extremely dangerous, and I think it's simply better for white. So everybody is playing bishop e3, a6, therefore, and then you can play a3 if you want, just excluding knight f6 variation. So, but okay, I decided to look at it, I mean to show it to you via the a3 move order. But anyways, after knight f6 you can play bishop e3, and actually it's playable as well. So you can start with whatever move you want. So here it's also if a6, f4, let's say d6, queen f3, or this seems to be, well, very playable for white. I mean, not a bad Sicilian at all. And d5 probably is not enough to equalize. e5, knight e4, this seems to be dubious. Queen e2 and the pawn on e4 is pretty weak. And in case of bishop e7, you can try f4 now. But in any case, yeah, knight f6, again, you can dismiss this variation playing first bishop e3. So let's concentrate on this position, a6, bishop e3. And yeah, now if knight f6, f4, according to theory, it's not so easy for black. Takes on d4, and as you will see in these b5 systems, you don't hurry getting the knight to f6. So here there is e5 move possible. So, but black is actually experiencing some problems in this position. But I think that b5 is the correct way of playing in this position. And White's idea in general is to take on c6 here. Otherwise, black will develop in a typical Taimanov fashion and be fine. So that is the whole point here, to play knight takes c6. And yeah, it can represent some danger for black, but not, yeah, probably you should take with a pawn here, because taking with a queen after bishop d3, by the way, bishop e2 is also quite serious, but bishop d3, bishop b7, and now let's say castles, knight f6, rook e1 or queen e2, this position, yeah, it's probably okay for black, probably okay, but something like that, but it's definitely also playable for white. Maybe bishop e2 is an interesting try. But I think dc6 should be equalizing here, because white lost tempo on a3. You know that there will be a lot of with bishop e2 variation. There will be a position where white has bishop is on e2 and pawn is on a2. And in this structure, black is not really threatening before. So that's why here black is almost a tempo up compared to regular positions. I think it's okay. I mean, let's say usually white best try here is to play queen g4 or queen f3, and anyways after e5 white is playing queen g3 usually. Or queen g4, knight f6, queen g3. Again, if you take on g3, this endgame is probably a bit better for white, but e5 seems to be doing fine, only that after bishop e2, now very important move is h5. Otherwise, black can get worse. But after h5, well, still white can try, but it seems that according to theory and to engines, black has very good chances to equalize. So all in all, this bishop e3 a3 is also quite interesting try. It's pretty new. I mean, only maybe last few years started to gain popularity. But yeah, such move as a3 cannot be a refutation of any variation, including Taimanov. So then f4. Yeah, this is an old system. Old system was very popular in the 80s. I played myself in the childhood against all these Taimanov variations, Rublevsky variation. I like to play f4, but I think it's not too dangerous for black. I believe that a6 is a little bit better move further than knight takes d4, even though knight d4 maybe also is enough to equalize, but I think it's better to start with a6. Because here take on d4 takes a6, maybe white has an interesting try a4. Well, the main theory goes bishop e3, b5, long castle, bishop b7, bishop d3, rook c8. A very typical situation. White has, as quite often in Sicilians, quite a serious development advantage, but black's position is very flexible. I mean, it's very important in Sicilians to manage b5 without too much damage as early as possible. And then black slowly develops. I mean, not so easy to find a target for white. I mean, king b1 is usually always a good move. And let's say knight f6 is perfectly playable. Okay, maybe after rook e1, white can try to be a bit better, but not too much, I believe, anyways. But even knight h6, strangely enough, is what engine is proposing. Quite strange way of playing. And rook h1, f6. But maybe not so bad at all, because then black is very flexible. Knight can go to f7. At some point, bishop c5 will come. This endgame is never going to be too much for white. So probably it's quite okay for black. But a4 may be interesting, because now there is a line b6, quite direct line, bishop e3. Some issue with the pawn on b6, bishop b7 probably very close to equality. Now white should take the pawn, and bishop b4 attacking the pawn on e4, then knight f6. I think it's almost equal. But in any case, I believe there is no reason not to play e6 in this position. Why to hurry taking on d4? I mean, the only explanation that white can take on c6 here, because other moves, if bishop e2, well, to start with, you can now take on d4 and play b5, and the bishop is already on e2, and it's probably okay. But also you can start with b5. So here black is first developing his pieces on the queen side, and then starting. And very important that the pawn stays on d7, of course. Here that the bishop can can develop from f8 somewhere to c5 pretty often. So here probably white can take on c6, queen takes c6, bishop f3, bishop b7. And in general, these positions with a pawn on f4, of course, yeah, black is a bit underdeveloped, but there is always a certain problem with the e4 pawn. So here black is I believe after bishop e2 is fine. Then bishop e3, and now, well, first of all, now you can transpose, and you excluded this a4 variation. But also you can just start with b5. You can also play b5. Let's say queen f3, bishop b7. There is some theory like this, bishop d3, knight f6. But yeah, it seems to me it's a very good Sicilian for black, because white cannot really manage to play e5, and long castle rook c8, and black has a lot of counterplay. Actually, most likely black will play d5 without playing d6 at some point. So king b1, and now there were some games with knight a5, quite interesting. Knight is going to c4, also knight b4 is not bad. Very unclear position, but in my opinion, black can be really happy with the outcome of the opening. So bishop e3 is probably nothing special as well. Then knight takes e6 is maybe the idea, yeah? The main idea. Queen takes c6, by the way, also playable. Bishop d3, b5, queen e2, bishop b7. There is some theory like this. a3, rook c8. You see the same way. Black is developing in the same fashion. Bishop d2. And now knight f6, of course, is most logical move. But even move like h5 might be interesting, actually. Also quite typical for this variation. But knight f6 is very close to equality also. e5, knight d5, bishop e4, queen c5. There is some theory here. White is trying to get a bit better, but nothing special. But actually bc6 is also okay. So you see, in this system, I believe, yeah, I mean, white has much more dangerous options than playing f4, because here black has a choice, which is, by the way, quite a rare case in many Sicilians. And, well, it's like you cannot really miss. There is, well, this variation is fine, this one is also okay. So, yeah, not very prosperous system for white, I believe. So after bc6, what e5 will be a transposition to the Rublevsky system, which we have just checked. This position was fine for black. Then queen e2, well, makes some sense. White just tries to stop d5, because then he can take twice. Yeah, I mean d5. The idea is that after ed, cd, knight takes d5 possible. So that is the point of queen e2, but of course then bishop on f1 is not good. And then rook b8 probably is a good idea, just to stop white from developing and castling long. And yeah, I also think black is perfectly fine here. So normally white is playing bishop d3, d5, let's say queen e2, knight f6, castles, bishop e7. But if you remember, and I hope you do, because we just studied the Rublevsky system, I think usually white is not playing f4 in these positions. Trying some other setups with f4, it's not, yeah, here, well, white can only be somewhat better if he can have some direct play. Otherwise, black will just develop, push c5, and white will have nothing. And here, bishop d2, well, white should try to play for attack somehow, but it doesn't really work. First of all, c5 may be possible still. b3, castles, and now if e5, okay, white has this typical sacrifice, which looks, sometimes it's winning, but here not. Black is in time. But what I would advise you with black is to castle. Again, this sacrifice doesn't seem to mate, and otherwise you just play g6 next. This is very, very solid. Just playing g6, no more sacrifices, and then e5 you come back with a knight. Sometimes white is trying to maneuver his knight via d1, f2, g4, but black will create his counterplay with c5. I mean, after e5, knight d7, very quickly black gets c5. Let's say white is trying to maneuver the knight, and then immediately c5, for instance, and after c4, a typical idea here quite often is even to take on c4, and then knight b6 and bishop b7, c4. Of course, white will try to get king closer to his knight closer to the king, but it's okay for black. It's a really good version of Rublevsky variation for black. So all in all, yeah, I don't see too many problems after f4. So this definitely wouldn't worry black. I'm absolutely sure about it. You still need to know it. But yeah, my recommendation, don't play it with white. There are much more dangerous options than this. So, and with black, yeah, you have a good choice of options after f4. Then the other moves, g4. Even this move started to be actually played from time to time. Again, most of the time the idea is, well, again, usually white is playing via this move order. Bishop e3, a6, and now g4. I mean, that is, and this we will consider seriously. It's a very strangely enough, because g4 seems like a little bit hit in the air, but actually it is very dangerous, but we will consider it via the bishop e3 move order. Here I wanted to show you g4 without bishop e3, when white is trying to play in some other way, but then black should be fine. Well, there are some moves like h6, maybe here, I don't know, playable, let's say. Bishop b4 is not great, because knight db5 and a3, bishop e7, bishop e3, and even though a6, knight d4, white lost a couple of tempis, but black also actually lost tempis, and bishop on e7, yeah, it's a bit too early, it's difficult to develop the knight, so knight f6, g5 will come, so here white is better. So after g4, a6 is most logical move. Here, as I already mentioned, probably bishop e3 is the best move, but sometimes white is trying to play h4, b5, okay, h6 possible, but without the knight on f6, it doesn't seem to be necessary to play h6, so b5, and now again knight takes e6. Strangely enough, after dc queen f3, here in this position, actually engines are showing a plus for white. I don't know why it doesn't look, frankly, so easy, but it doesn't look like it's so clear. But here engines like white. So in this position, queen takes e6 is very logical already, especially since white kind of weakened a bit his structure. Black haven't castled yet, and white still has a long way to finish development, so it's not going to be made soon. And now a3. Well, it will be played sooner or later, let's say bishop g2, bishop b7. At some point b4 will be an issue, so a3, bishop b7, bishop g2. But here, again, if black pawn is on d6 in these positions, it's it's much more favorable for white, this type of play. When the pawn is on d7, yeah, very often bishop can get to d6, c5, and black's position somehow becomes much more flexible. Not even mentioning the fact that it's a tempi, that black has to lose a tempi playing d6. So here I believe it's very unclear. Let's say queen c7 is possible, a very possible move, maybe trying even to go bishop d6 later, bishop e5, knight e7, sometimes knight g6. I think it's very unclear. Or another option, maybe even to try h5, g5, knight e7, for instance. And at some point you can, if white castles, of course, then he will immediately have problems with the h4 pawn, castle knight g6. So yeah, all in all, complicated, playable for white, but yeah, not, I think, doesn't represent a big danger for black. So I mean, but this is another story. This is very, very serious. So we'll consider it later. So now let's move to g3 variation. In most of Sicilians, these G3 setups are, in my opinion, are not very ambitious. It's just white is just trying to have a solid position. Not usually there are not so many variations, not so much theory, and white just playing well, a complicated equal Sicilian. But that is one of the very few, if not the only one, where G3 system represents a real danger. I mean, it's a very, very serious weapon against Taimanov. And black is, well, you really have to know what to do against this system, because there are only, in my opinion, two lines which give considerable chances to equalize. And if you in quite a number of lines, black is rather passive and actually having a pretty unpleasant position. So g3. Now you better play a6 first, because if knight f6, well, to start with it doesn't make sense, because after bishop g2 there is nothing better than a6 anyways. But knight db5 seems to be very unpleasant already. Queen b8 and bishop f4, you see, so g3 is also useful in this sense. After e5, bishop g5, black probably has to play a6, and white is in time to take on f6. And after both ab, bishop g5, or gf, knight a3, black's position is pretty dubious. Let's say bishop a3, ba3, and the king on a8 is weak. Knight e7, queen f3. Maybe still not too bad, but very dangerous position. I wouldn't advise you to play knight f6, because as I mentioned already, it doesn't make sense anyways. So a6, bishop g2. Now, of course, knight f6 seems to be an automatic move, but actually d6 is a very interesting move order. It's one of those very playable systems, which I believe, might be really a very decent choice for black. Why not knight f6? Why to start with d6? I will explain you later when we will go through knight f6. But the main idea is that now if white castles, which is of course the most logical move, then black first plays bishop d7. Actually, the idea is that already having queen on c7 and pawn on a6, in fact, black is struggling to finish his development against the g3 system. And that is why here g3 is more dangerous than in most of the other lines, because it's not so easy, as you will see later. Here, after bishop d7, black manages by means of rook e1, bishop e7. So you see, keeping the knight on g8, and then trying to go knight f6 next. And here, after knight takes e6, bishop takes e6, and there are actually some tries to play queen g4, at least to force black to weaken sort of a little bit his position. But actually I think h5 is not weakening at all. Well, h5 of course works because queen takes g7, the queen is trapped. But white's idea was to play queen e2 and then to pretend that h5 is not a good move for black. But in fact I think it's perfectly fine. h4 is the main move here, and black is doing fine. But even knight f6, computer says that it's perfectly okay. So queen g4 I wouldn't recommend you to play, but maybe knight e2 can be an interesting way of playing, because here of course you can always play a4, and this type of position we will see later. I mean, it's very typical move. But knight e2 here is an interesting plan. Black is just in time. After knight f6, knight d4, bishop d7, b3. This is the idea. White's idea is to put pawn on c4, bishop b2, rook c1, and to have a certain space advantage. But black probably should, if he wants to equalize, after castle c4, he should play b5 immediately, connected with exchange sacrifice, but there is a good compensation after e5. Well, otherwise black has counterplay on the queen side. And after e5, just takes, bishop a8, rook a8, knight f3, rook d8. There were some games here. And of course, black has a very powerful diagonal. Yeah, this diagonal a8, h1. It's really very dangerous. The bishops will get into attack. Bishop to a8, bishop to c5, and even engines usually like in material already here believe that black is not worse, and in practical sense, it's much easier to play with black. So this is the way to parry this quite dangerous concept of trying to play b3, c4, and then if a4, then it will get to this typical position, which I'm going to show you a little bit later. We have a different move order. Knight takes c6, for example. You can take also like this: first bishop c6, a4, knight f6, a5. It's also a dangerous plan, a strategical plan, because black had no time really to stop a5, and now white is just trying to play positional chess, castles, and the main theory usually normally rook is already on a1 in these positions, and then the theory goes like this: knight d7, knight a4, So white's plan is to get the knight to b6 somehow, and because if queen a5 there is knight b6 move possible. And now very important that rook e8, knight b6, and in order not to get worse, really, I mean, because white wants to push c4, b4, b5, and can you just give one tempi to white, he will be better. That's why black usually goes f5 here. That's very important idea in this position with g3 bishop g2 variation. Very important actually tabia. It can happen via different move orders. So many games. But black after a5, black has enough counterplay, and actually the position is pretty equal. So that's why maybe the difference is that rook is still on f1. So maybe white can try here to play queen e2. Let's say knight d7, rook d1. Maybe it will be a bit more convenient for white to have this setup. But in any case, it doesn't seem that it will be anything very special for white. I think black is doing fine in this variation. So that's why maybe for white, I mean, there are two ideas which I believe are interesting to try if you want to play the g3 system with white. One is to try to play with long castle, this bishop e3, knight f6, queen e2, or maybe starting with f4. Then, well, only after f4 you should always consider these ideas. Let's say bishop e7 and then knight takes d4, e5, b5 ideas. But let's say maybe queen e2, bishop d7 is maybe an interesting try. Long castle, bishop e7, f4. Well, of course, this is a bit a bit less convincing for white than usually those Sicilians, because white will have to play g4 one day anyway. So, and then you play g3 and then g4. So white lost the tempi in this sense. And also bishop on g2, sometimes rook c8, knight a5, knight c4. The c4 square is a bit weakened, but still, so black should be in general okay here. I believe just a complicated Sicilian, but at least it's a try. It's a serious try for white. I mean, it's quite sharp. And another idea is just to take on c6. This is a positional way of playing. By the way, it was played by Magnus Carlsen. He won a very nice game. I advise you to look at it against Rapport in Vaikanzea. If I remember correctly, 2018 maybe was it, or 2019. I think 2019. So knight c6, bc, castles, knight f6, knight a4 he played. So he just wants to make this setup b3, c4, bishop b2, and then using a certain space advantage. Well, he won a very nice game, but well, first of all, he is Magnus Carlsen simply. I wouldn't say that white is better here. Maybe not. Maybe black with a accurate play can slowly equalize, but it's a serious try for white just to play like this. For instance, the idea, I think, in case of bishop e7, white wants to play c4, and then if castles, to play maybe even c5 immediately. So that's why Hungarian grandmaster played rook b8 just to meet c4 with c5, and then c4, c5, b3, and then Magnus played bishop b2, queen d2, and queen a1 he played after bishop b7, protecting this pawn on a4. And he managed to win a nice game, but maybe white is at best slightly better. But of course, yeah, it's perfectly playable for black. Still, maybe after d6, it might be actually the most interesting try for white, because in this position, unless, okay, of course, you can always play a4, bishop e3, this classical way of playing Sicilian, but I mean, this Scheveningen classical play, but normally black is quite okay in these positions, even though, of course, white it's playable for white. So d6 is a solid system. I can recommend you against g3, but the most common is knight f6, and there is one system which is very, very direct, and if it equalizes, then it kind of kills the g3 variation. So, but for the moment, black is getting very close to equalizer, but not completely yet. So knight f6, castles, and knight takes d4, a very direct move. Well, what are the other options? Of course, b5 is bad because of e5, and you know this diagonal is just practically losing immediately. So b5 you don't have time to play. Then what else? Here, bishop e7 looks very logical, but suddenly after rook e1, the problem is that black is not really in time to get his typical Scheveningen structure, d6 castle. Yeah, if black would manage just d6 and castle, everything would be fine, but he's not in time. Because if knight takes d4 now, then e5 is a very powerful move. And actually, it's pretty bad for black here. It's, well, quite well-known trap. Knight d4, e5, computer already shows 1.5 for white. So this is not playable. Then if d6, then knight takes e6, b takes e6, and e5, a very important tactical resource. After d takes e5, white has rook takes e5. And of course, if queen takes e5, white takes on c6, takes on a8, and his pawn up. Therefore, black usually castles, and here white has a structural advantage. So there were quite many games, and it seems that it's not too much. I mean, it's playable for black, but it's unpleasant. I mean, just the pawn structure is, white's pawn structure is more sound, and then he's, well, enjoying a slight but lasting plus. Here you can play rook e1 simply, but also bishop f4 is possible, because bishop d6 doesn't work. There is rook takes e6 tactics. Bishop takes f4, rook takes e6, and okay, it's, white is at least better, if not winning. So then after d6, you by force, well, white is getting a very pleasant, I mean, after bishop f4, black should play queen a7 or queen b7. Actually, it's defendable. Yeah, even queen a7 is possible, because there are some ideas to sacrifice a pawn to have some compensation. But white doesn't have to take a pawn. Anyways, it doesn't equalize fully. And then if castle, then white already takes on c6. Of course, bc6, e5, knight d5, knight a4 is pretty bad, because c4 is coming, and black has an issue with the bishop on c8. So d takes e6 should be played, and white is in time to play e5. Very important. Rook d8, let's say, queen f3, knight d5, and this position is just slightly worse. For example, h4 is one of the possible moves, and white wants to play bishop g5. It's defendable for black. It's not much for white, but it's very passive, and black is just, you know, slowly trying to defend and to make a draw here. There are not so many people who like to play like this with black, so that's why bishop e7 move almost disappeared from the tournament practice nowadays, because black seems to be always slightly worse here. There is a very strange h5 move, which actually it's rather popular, I guess, because I understand why. Because black after g3, black has very few options where he can get a real counterplay. Yeah, it's always like being maybe a little tiny worse and just defending a little worse position. So I understand that when people saw that there is a h5 is not too bad, of course it's tempting to play. To get some counterplay, but frankly, it's hard to believe that such move can be really good, even though it's playable. It is playable. So now, first of all, knight f3 might be interesting, just trying to stop h4 and then trying to make use of this g5 square, but actually unpleasant enough is h3, I believe. So now h4, of course, the idea is that if h4, white simply goes g4, and most of the time black follows up with bishop c5 here. But now knight takes c6 seems to be very dangerous for black. If bc6, for example, queen f3, then bishop g5 comes. It's pawn on h5 is not. I mean, black has issues with castle now, so probably in white's favor. So d takes e6. Now black just needs one move, e5, and he will be perfectly fine. But here, very dangerous sacrifices. e5, queen a5, let's say bishop f4, and the idea is, let's say, in case of queen f5, rook e1, for example, or even queen e2, and rook e5 is threatening. Very dangerous long-lasting initiative white has. So I think h5 in general is more blitz move. For blitz, if white knows how to play against h5, if white is ready to face h5, then probably it wouldn't fully equalize. So then what else? What are the other options? Well, there is quite an interesting move order, which is d6. Again, knight takes c6, as I've mentioned, bc, knight a4 here is perfectly possible. Yeah, bishop e3, it's, well, typical Sicilian, which is white is usually trying to go g4, g5, but it's unclear. It's quite unclear. So rook e1. Usually this is the idea. As you already know, the point is that in case of bishop e7, white, if you remember, takes on c6 and plays e5. So after rook e1, yeah, how to finish development for black? This is a question. Actually, nowadays engines, I noticed, I didn't know this idea and it looked very dubious, but they pretend that you can take on d4. Well, there is no e5 move already. And after queen takes d4, playing bishop d7. And then trying to, I don't know why bishop d7. I suppose the idea is that in case of bishop e7, maybe they're worried about a move like e5, and then it will be a bit of a problem with how to develop the bishop on c8. So bishop d7, and actually pretending that it's nothing very special for white. So this might be another interesting system to play with black. At least it's something new. There are not so many games on it. Otherwise, yeah, bishop d7 here, already knight takes c6 is a problem. That's why, if you remember, we were starting with d6, bishop d7, bishop e7 with a knight on g8 to avoid knight takes c6, because in that position we were taking with a bishop on c6. Imagine, yeah, which I was showing you, instead of knight on g8, black bishop is on e7. But here there is knight d5 move, and this is a big difference. So knight d5, and the black has nothing better than take, play e5, but this is a4, e5, this is pretty bad. Sicilian white is much better. That's why after knight c6, black has no choice and take b takes c6. But in this position, the bishop on d7 is pretty badly placed, pretty misplaced. Actually, it has to be on b7 here. So here probably white should get some plus. Knight a4 is the most logical way of playing, but by the way, also queen e2 might be interesting, because white wants to play e5. With a bishop on c8, black would meet queen e2 with knight d7. Here e5 is a threat. I mean, positional threat to get a slightly better pawn structure, so probably e5, and now, for instance, knight d1 might be already a very interesting plan. Trying to get knight to e3, c4, knight to f5, so, or also knight a4, the same plan, trying to go c4. So all in all, bishop d7 probably doesn't equalize here. If you already played, then better without knight f6. But maybe rook b8, actually, yeah, there is this move order. Rook b8, a very strange move. Well, I think that it's playable. Still, knight c6, I mean, this. So black just wants bishop e7. Black wants to be able to develop in time. Somehow I have my doubts that rook b8 would be so good, because it's losing tempi. I have my doubts. But okay, it's not refuted. At least probably white will have a certain way to be pleasantly slightly better. I believe knight takes c6 looks like a good option. B takes c6. Now if e5, this position is already playable for black. Well, idea that now if queen takes e5, bishop f4 works, and then bishop takes b8. So white still has this tactics, but according to theory, after bishop d6, black has a much better version here, and b3, maybe white can still pretend to be a little bit better, but not so much already, because black can go c5, then c4. He wants to play, probably it's close to equal already. But you can take and play b3. I think this would still probably be, well, quite comfortable for white. Well, actually it is more or less a game Carlsen against Rapport, only that white doesn't have to hurry playing c4, which might be in his favor a bit. Knight d7, queen d2, first rook d1, and then white will see if he plays c4 or not. So maybe for white, actually in both systems, d6, bishop d7 without knight on f6, or here, this setup, knight takes c6, is actually quite playable and might be prosperous. So that's basically all slow system, so to say. But there is a very direct system: knight takes d4, queen takes d4, bishop c5. Yeah, this is, yeah. If the system equalizes, then well, then g3 is not too dangerous. But yeah, it's not so clear yet. Queen d3. If queen d3 now, then both actually knight g4 is okay. Also d6 is not a big problem, because probably white will play bishop f4 anyways. But the main move is bishop f4. Bishop f4. Now the endgame, of course, here is pretty bad for black because he cannot finish development really. So d6 has to be played, and the best square is d2 for the queen now. Because if queen d3, knight g4, there is knight g4, knight gets to e5 later with a tempi. And that is quite important. Actually, after queen d2, the problem of knight g4, not only that there is no tempi knight e5, but white has this tactical resource b4. That's why he put the queen on d2. Very nice, bishop takes b4, knight d5. Very strong tactics, ed queen b4, and white is at least much better, if not already winning. So after queen d2, e5, bishop g5 is also not so good because this d5 square. That's why queen d2, h6 has to be played. Here, the play is very direct. I mean, if black manages to play e5, bishop e6, castles, no problem at all for black, just an equal position. So white is playing rook a d1 here, e5, and bishop e3. And this is a tabia. There were many games played in this position. There was an interesting idea lately played by Fabiano Caruana in Stavanger a couple of years ago in the tournament. He played here, the main line was always bishop e6. And now bishop takes e5, dc5, knight d5. It's for white only way to fight for something is to play like this. Bishop d5, ed5, you have to block this pawn, queen d6. And now there is first of all a very, very long theory with f4, very direct play, castles, f3, queen e5, d6. Well, if black will manage to blockade this pawn here, like c4, queen d6, shouldn't be a problem. But there is d6, black is taking on b2, and the theory actually goes on and on here. It's not 100% clear if black manages to make a draw here or not. So which is already, you need to memorize a lot, and very, very accurate, to play very accurately. I think, according to theory, finally black manages, but also not so funny somehow. But another story is that even if white plays slow chess like this, strangely enough, this position is not so easy, because of course, in general, if black will get just his knight on d6, queen on f6, just exchange the position of those pieces, black will be probably just better. But it's very difficult to get it there, and the queen is stuck on d6 because he cannot move immediately. D pawn will push. So there were quite some games, also computer games in this position. Its black position is definitely holdable, but it's not equal. It's not completely equal. Black and white can still try. So that's why bishop e6, in general, there are some issues after bishop e6, and that is the reason why this system was not so popular usually, for black players, because there is no complete clear equality, and it's suffering. But now, not long time ago, Caruana played bishop takes e3, the move which was supposed to be not good, not because if queen e3, bishop e6, no problem, black is in time to protect the pawn on d6, castle, and have a very good position. But the issue is f takes e3. And now, okay, king e7, of course, doesn't work because of rook takes f6 and knight d5 check. So you're losing the d6 pawn. But bishop e6 was played, so Fabiano just sacrificed this pawn like this. And, it's of course, black is, just basically playing for a draw without this pawn. But in fact, it's very difficult for white to get something very special because of those double pawns, then quite bad double pawns. Also, black is, the bishop on g2 is a bit limited. Black wants to take king e7, rook d8. The game ended in a draw. I had a feeling that white maybe could play better and pose some problems, but it might be actually perfectly playable for black. And then my recommendation, actually while preparing this lesson, I started to analyze. Okay, I wanted to make sure that if it's playable G3 system, because I think that if this position is fine for black, then it's pretty direct. Then this is definitely, I would recommend to play with black this system. So I wanted to make sure. I couldn't finally totally equalize after either bishop e6 or bishop takes e3, and but then I paid attention on the bishop b4 move, and actually, to me, it seems that it should be quite a direct equalizer. I mean, again, a little worse for black, but black still has to play a few accurate moves, but I think it should be holding. So it might be a very important, line bishop b4. I think it's practically not played on the serious level, but so this is a kind of idea for you who listen to this course. I think it's very close to a draw. So now the play is pretty forced, so you just have to do something with the bishop on b4. So one move is knight b5, the most logical, of course, knight b5, tactics ab, queen takes b4, rook takes a2. It looks a bit dubious, but again, the position is very concrete, so there are not so many options for white also. And to me, it seems that black is very close to equality. For example, if rook takes d6, then you can castle, rook d2, bishop e6. Okay, engines are given some 0-2 for white, but it looks like the pawn on b5 will not be lost, and otherwise black should manage somehow. Because he has active rook. The bishop on g2 in this particular situation is not so active, and I think draw should be manageable without too many difficulties. That's my feeling. And queen takes b5 check, bishop d7, queen b4. This looks good, but rook a6, and it's engine saying that it's practically equal, this position, because black is always in time with castle, and has pawn on d6 is protected. Of course, in this situation, in this position, if white doesn't manage something rather quickly, why should he have anything very special? Again, with this strange bishop on g2. So knight b5, probably black is very close to equalize. Another idea is a3, bishop c3, queen c3, queen c3, bc. And again, now the issue is the d6 pawn. There is a small problem if king e7, c4 comes with the idea c5, and that is not so easy to parry. I mean, here black can suffer. So probably the best is just to sacrifice this pawn. Bishop e6, rook takes d6, rook c8. And again, engine is given some 0-2 for white, but I analyzed it a bit. I checked, went further a bit in my analysis. It seemed to me that black, should manage a draw relatively easy. I mean, if he knows what he is doing, it looks pretty drawish. Okay, I understand that this kind of play is a bit unpleasant for black, so you are really fighting for a draw, but from other point of view, it's very direct. If it's a draw, it's a draw. This, or maybe Fabiano's idea of taking on e3 and playing bishop e6, sacrificing the pawn, maybe also is. So it's still not totally sure if black equalizes or not here, but it's very close. So this is one option for black. Another option is probably to play, for example, without knight f6, d6, bishop d7 variation. So if you want to play something more complicated and not just to try to equalize and make a draw, in a slightly inferior endgame, let's say. And so for white, it's a serious option. It's a serious system. I mean, there is no very clear, straightforward equality shown yet from the black side. So g3, I can recommend you together with bishop e2 system, which we are going to see right now. So these are two very solid, very positionally sound systems. But G3 has much less theory. I mean, there is not so much theory as you saw already. So G3 is here. It's maybe in this particular Sicilian with the queen on c7, Taimanov Sicilian. I can recommend you to have G3 move in your as part of your repertoire. Maybe not the only move, not the main move, because I personally like bishop e3 also, and bishop e2 is not so easy for black, but yeah, g3 is a serious weapon against Taimanov. So after bishop e2, which is well, the main move, maybe second main move after bishop e3, and for quite a long time it was definitely the main continuation in this opening system with knight c6, queen c7. Well, black has not a very big choice here. But I believe that it's rather close to equality. I mean, this system together with g3 is very positional. White is not claiming that he is fighting for a serious advantage, as it actually happens after bishop e3. There the game is sharp, and okay, white, if black doesn't know exactly and precisely what is, I mean, the certain line, then white can get really a big advantage. Here it's not the case, but it's not so easy for black to equalize fully. At least you need to know quite a lot of theory. So I will give you the directions here, the main directions, and but the theory is absolutely huge. So you will have to study a bit on your own, especially if you are playing black. But yeah, I think that all in all, black is holding here. So bishop e2, now a6 is played usually most of the time, but in fact knight f6 is it's quite interesting move order. There is not so much sense in it, but still you can trick a little bit. I mean, the only thing that it gives an additional option, knight db5, queen b8, f4, a6, e5. There is this system, it's quite unclear. A, b, ef, b4, takes, knight b5, d5. I think in general black is okay here. Otherwise, there is no harm to start with knight f6, because if white castles, which is the most natural, then black has quite an interesting option to play bishop e7, bishop e3, castles f4, d6, without a6 for the moment. And there might be some difference. For instance, if king h1, then it makes sense. Okay, black can always transpose, of course, to a6, and we will consider this position a bit later in this lesson. But knight takes d4 is quite interesting, actually. If queen takes d4, b6, this is the idea, followed by bishop b7, and maybe black actually is equalizing quite comfortably like this. Or if bishop takes d4, then e5, bishop e3, and also b6. So you see, like this, the pawn on b6 is protected, and also knight b5 is never really a threat. So it seems to be working pretty well. And in case of queen e1, also black can take and play e5. Here it's, well, we will have this position with pawns on a6, a4. And again, bishop e3, now also b6 is possible, or takes and bishop e6. So actually after castle is not clear if white can get any advantage. So white needs to know the correct move order. I believe is to play bishop e3 here. That is much more precise in my opinion. So for those of you who want to play it with white, you should play bishop e3 here, because in this case black already must play a6. Bishop b4, knight b5 is not great, and just a3 doesn't make sense for black. And in case of bishop e7, then you have maybe even g4 move, but for sure f4. And after d6, now you can move to the systems which I have already mentioned, in that they're quite dangerous, with queen d2 or g4, maybe even g4. So probably for black it's better to play a6, and we will consider this position later. Well, again, I can tell you that you can get this position via bishop e3, and in case of knight f6, as I've mentioned already, f4 is quite strong, so black usually plays a6, and you can play bishop e2 here if you want. I mean, that's another option. And now, okay, knight f6 will just transpose. And in case of b5, I think this was the way how Peter Leko played against me once in Rapid Chess in 2000. I won quite a nice game. I took on c6, dc6 castles, and after bishop b7 f4, well, black is having some issues with development. I think that Peter played c5 against me, and I went f5 very quickly, starting to attack, and somehow managed to mate Peter. He did. I think he never castled in this game finally. So maybe better is to play bishop e7, but still a3. If knight f6, e5, always better for white, and if c5, f5, it's quite dangerous. So that is an option to start with bishop e3. But yeah, also like this, knight f6, bishop e3, you can also play. Only that, yeah, just for you to know that if castle bishop e7, this position you might not get all those main lines we are going to check right now. So, but okay, a6, let's say this is the most typical move order, most usual castles, knight f6. b5 is well, quite dangerous, I would say. For sure, I would not recommend you to do it with black, because knight takes e6, d takes e6, and now white has a wide choice. First of all, even bishop e3 is very unpleasant, as I've just showed you. But another very interesting idea is actually pawn sacrifice. e5 takes rook e1, queen c7, a4. Black has to play b4, knight e4, bishop e7, bishop f3, for instance. I mean, white has a very nice long-term compensation. Black's position is quite dangerous. But the simplest is a4. If you want it solid and safe, then a4, b4, knight b1. Because here the problem is bishop b7. I think you will get this ab, and knight takes b5 will probably will be very painful here. cb, bishop takes b5 check, and it's going to end badly for black. So b4 is usually played, and here knight b1, knight f6, knight d2, bishop c5, let's say bishop d3, knight goes to c4, e5, queen f3, a very comfortable, pleasant plus for white because of the good knight on c4 and some weaknesses on the queen side, black's weaknesses. So I don't know how much is it, but it's definitely not equal the position. So b5 is really dubious here. Knight f6, bishop e3. This is the main move. The other option is to play king h1, but this move is not very dangerous. I think bishop e3 should be played. After king h1, black can just transpose to the Scheveningen positions with king h1 already played, which is, let's say, not necessary. But maybe even better is, there is an interesting move, bishop b4 also. And, well, the main line goes like this now. Bishop g5, white is playing, takes on c3, take on f6, takes, knight e7. And this position is not so clear. I mean, maybe white has some initiative, of course, but also weaknesses on the c line, this double pawns c3, c2, objectively not so clear. h5 to stop queen h6, and rook b1, b6, queen e3, bishop b7. There were some games like this. Then black wants to get h4, and of course, yeah, king is on the center, but in general, black's position is also solid, everything is developed, so probably it is around equal in my opinion. So bishop b4 is perfectly playable, but maybe the best is just to take on d4, queen d4, bishop c5, queen d3, and now b5. Actually, even h5 might be perfectly playable, but usually the theory goes like this: b5, f4, bishop b7, bishop f3. And now, first of all, b4 is possible. White has very little here. e5 is the best try. And now this position is takes on f3, maybe nominally slightly better for white, but it's really not much. I mean, that is one option. And another option is, in fact, still to play h5. I mean, and in case of e5, knight g4, there were some games, and black was equalizing here. So yeah, so king h1 is I don't think it makes sense to play it with white, because you give a lots of knight d4, bishop b4, both quite difficult to refute. And in any case, you maximum you get is this Scheveningen, which by the way might be the best choice for black anyways after bishop e3, which is the main move. So now black's choice is whether to play bishop e7, so those classical variations, whether b5 is not good here, because knight takes e6, d takes e6, f4. This is, I mean, it's not too bad, but it's very dangerous, yeah, because after f4, now b4, white has, first of all, e5 is very dangerous here, but actually knight a4 is even stronger according to engine, c5, c3, and white is much better here. I mean, black just has some development issues. Bishop b7, e5, obviously, maybe the best for black is to play knight d5, take cd5, and to get pretty bad French defense, bishop d4, c3 with this awful bishop, so white is better. Then e5 it is at least principle. But here, well, both, first of all, queen e1 is dangerous, and also takes on e5, and let's say king h1, trying to go bishop f4, e5. Well, of course, if black managed to develop, he will survive somehow, but it's still a question. Also, bishop d4 is threatening, so very dangerous. b5 and not recommended. And then, yeah, then if you want to avoid those main Sicilians with bishop e7, then bishop b4 instead is a move. It's okay. I mean, probably it's holding, but it's quite passive, I would say, quite passive. Well, especially if it would be only about knight a4 move, which was for a very long time was almost like considered to be the only move for white to fight for something, then it's probably possible to make a draw here. I mean, to get a very slightly worse position, but with a very good drawing chances. There is a lot of theory. I mean, there were so many games played on this position. All moves were tried. Castles, b5, even rook b8, all moves. I mean, just to note that knight e4 is bad because knight takes e6, and in case if you take with a pawn, then there is double attack, queen d4, and just winning the piece. And of course, if queen c6, knight b6, it also gets pretty bad. Rook b8, queen d4, and there is no development. Black's position is quite bad. So knight e4 is a mistake. I had myself some games here. Vishy Anand played bishop d6 against me. But most of the time he actually played a lot of this line. Sometime, I think, beginning of the century, around 2000, 2002, this period of time. Bishop e7 was most of the time he would play. And now the theory goes like this: knight takes e6, bc6, knight b6, rook b8. It's a main line. Of course, there are some options for white also, but this seems to be the most dangerous. Knight c8, queen c8, and now e5 is here. Vishy Anand made quite many draws already. I mean, knight d5, bishop c1, bishop c5, c4, knight e7. Garry Kasparov played at least once or maybe even twice against Vishy like this. Tried to get something, but finally it's not much. I mean, it's quite little for white. So I think the more challenging move is bishop d4. Here, and okay, again, the theory goes and goes here, goes on and on. I think the main line is c5, bishop e5, rook b6. It's a bit better for white. I mean, but black is also close to draw. I mean, quite close. I wouldn't say that he fully equalized, but it's very solid. So that is a little passive, but at least, possible to try to analyze and to hold it. But lately, knight takes e6 is becoming fashionable, and it's also quite unpleasant in my opinion. So that's why I would advise you with black to play bishop e7. Of course, you need to know a lot of theory. That is a problem. after bishop e7, but at least there the game is a bit less sad than here, because here in this variation with bishop b4, black is just fighting for a draw, trying to equalize, trying to hold some slightly worse endgames here and there. But knight takes e6 actually is a new discovery, maybe only a few years ago. White started to play knight takes e6, and I analyzed it just for this course. I mean, especially for this lesson, and I couldn't find a clear equality for black here. So what is the choice? B takes e6 is pretty set. First of all, knight a4. I'm not sure black fully equalize after knight a4, but a3 is mostly played. Quite strange move, but using the fact that after take on c3, yeah, it's pretty bad to take on a4 because of queen d4 and knight f6, bishop f4, and okay, it's pretty bad. All the black squares are weak. So black should castle, and then f3. e5 you have to play, and let's say a4, a5. And now this position is holdable. Yes, it's holdable probably, but it's very unpleasant. It's very annoying. I think I remember Grishuk won this position once against Grachev, I believe. And white has an interesting move, queen b1, but even the most straightforward way of playing, rook b1, black should go c5, let's say queen c1, trying to go queen b2, b6, bishop c4. And black will suffer. Black will suffer because the b6 pawn is quite weak. White at some point maybe will play bishop g5, get the bishop on d5. Yeah, it's very difficult for white to win this position. True, if black defends well, but yeah, it's who wants to play like this, the opening, and just to know that you are going to defend for the rest of the game. So even if it's not too much, but yeah, I think you would agree with me that it's pretty sad to play like this with black, especially choosing Sicilian as an opening. So b takes c6 probably is a critical move, and now in fact white has two options, and both of them represent some danger. I think f4 is the most challenging in my opinion. I would go with f4 with white, but queen d4 is also a serious move. Queen d4, now c5 is almost necessary. I mean, otherwise for sure black cannot equalize. Bishop d6, for instance, f4, e5, queen d2. Black is just not in time to develop correctly. I mean, to manage d6, bishop e6, and white is just better here. Then in case of bishop e7, simply e5 is unpleasant, knight d5, takes, and c4. And in case you take, I play rook c1, rook takes c4, and black is suffering, yeah, because it's just development, yeah. If he of course, if he would manage castle, bishop b7, it would be pretty little, but here white just have a very nice potential pass pawn on b line and very active pieces, so for sure black is still far from equalizing. So c5 is the best move, and queen c4. It's very strange, very computerish play, but rather dangerous. So now castle. If bishop b7, then a3 is pretty annoying, I believe, and takes on c3, let's say, queen takes c3, and bishop e4, f3, bishop g6, bishop takes c5. Well, it's yeah, you'll probably end up with black in some slightly worse endgame. With white has two bishops, and again the same set destiny is trying to defend it and to make a draw at the end of the day. So castles is more principle. Now in case of bishop f3, black can just play d6, because on e5 you have d5, yeah. So this is probably not too dangerous, but knight a4. Yeah, and this position is, yeah, it's very tricky. You really need to analyze it, especially with black, if you play with black, because the bishop is getting half trapped. Most logical move d5 suddenly leads to a very difficult position. After ed, queen f4, black is in quite serious trouble. I mean, just simply worse, because he probably has to take, play maybe c4, I don't know. because what to do otherwise? A3 is threatening, and then white is better in, well, in any way he wants. Just the question is how much and which one of those different options is most prosperous for white. But again, it's for sure that black is haven't equalized. So that's why knight a4, a5, and now you need to analyze this position, because I tried, I checked it, I couldn't finally get to some clear conclusion. The only conclusion I could get into that I would think twice playing it with black, because it's very strange play. Queen b3 supposed to be the best move, because bishop a6 was threatening. Well, now the bishop is packed on b4. So if c4, for example, just queen takes c4, this endgame is pretty unpleasant. Okay, black gets the pawn back, but still far from equalizing, because white has a very nice actually control on the queen side. Some knight on a4 here, it's very good piece. Going to b6 in some situations. So c4 leads to slightly worse endgame. Probably d5 then has to be played. And now some computerish play, it takes c4, trying to cut the bishop. Then, for instance, computer was saying bishop g4, then the best move bishop d1. I know, very strange play. It can be analyzed deeper and deeper. Still always a little bit better for white. I mean, I think, for instance, the main line is going like this: bishop e6, queen retreats, then black plays c4, but still without full equality, because of the white has a better pawn structure. But again, nothing too dangerous. That you need to work it out with black. I mean, if you will have the courage to play this variation, because you have also to learn, as I mentioned, instead of knight takes e6, move 9, knight a4 is a lot to learn also. Personally, for me, I feel like I don't know what for to learn all those lines, just to try to defend slightly inferior position and to try to make a draw if you play Sicilian. So I don't find it very attractive, this whole idea of playing this line with black. But still, also I want to show you what I think is the most interesting with white, and I believe f4 actually is quite dangerous for black. Now what to do? Bishop c3, again taking this pawn, queen, bishop d3 simply, and this position, knight f6, queen f3, and it's extremely dangerous for black. Even already I think the assessment is like 0.6, 0.7 for white, because just bishop d4, rook e1, queen h3, white has a very powerful initiative for this pawn, and probably it is not something black would play. So then d5 here is actually very dubious in this particular position, because e5, knight d7, knight a4, and white quickly gets c4, rook c1. Because black is not in time to play c5, his bishop will be cut. And after bishop e7, for instance, then c4 comes. And here actually bishop is much better than on d3, because we had this type of position with bishop on d3, queen on e2. Here white, for instance, castles rook c1. White has a very nice actually play, is purely playing on the queen side. Very nice positional advantage, because black will probably have to take on c4 at some point, and then you will end up with this weakness on the c6 or c5. I mean, very unpleasant position for black. So d5 I think is also not recommended. Then you should castle probably with black here. And now even e5, there is no full equality here, in my opinion. Knight d5 has to be played, takes, and this position is still slightly better for white. c3, bishop c5, queen d2. Even if I understand it's not too much, but somehow checking it with engines, I couldn't fully equalize still. Let's say after d6 and so on, and then white has even the b4 move, I remember, was quite interesting. Bishop e3, queen e3, takes, yeah. And then, black will, in case of bishop d7, I think you play a4, so you have here potentially passed pawn. Then on this side you can have potential attack also. Yeah, so pawn on c3 can be protected easily with rook f3 move. So maybe probably black's best is to change queens sooner than later. And this endgame is, of course, is holdable, must be holdable for black for sure with the accurate play, but it's not equal again. Yeah, it's white has some potential in this endgame, and black still needs to make a draw. So e5 is also slightly better for white, but I think knight a4 is the most challenging now. Again, yeah, as I mentioned already, you cannot take the pawn because of this double attack. So after knight a4, rook b8. So it's a little bit different version of a similar play that we have seen playing knight a4 instead of knight takes e6. Rook b8, bishop f3, and again, it's not easy for black. For instance, d5, then the same story. e5, knight d7, c4, d takes c4, because again, white wants to start to put a lot of pressure on the c line. It's not even clear where the queen should retreat from c7 and how to develop this bishop on c8. So dc4, a typical idea I've mentioned already. And now let's say queen c2. Black is suffering. Black is still far from equality. Here, maybe after bishop f3, maybe rook d8 can be played here. Little bit strange move, but normally bishop e7 is the most logical move then. And now c4, because e5, knight d5 here is not dangerous already. So c4, d6, and now you get this typical position, queen c2, something similar than looks pretty much like 6g3 variation, like this game Carlson rapport, which I've mentioned already. And so c5 is very likely, and now white just sets up his piece. It's different because bishop is on e3. At that position, bishop was on b2. Knight d7, let's say rook d1, bishop b7, b3, and engine assessment is very stable, slightly better for white. I mean, it gives a stable plus. It's true that black doesn't have much counterplay, and white probably will slowly start to push g4, g5, h4 to gain some space. I mean, black is pretty passive. Usually in these positions, the plan is like playing rook d8 and then knight b8, knight c6, but white will find some ideas in the meantime, and especially this idea of let's say, just more theoretically, I'm mentioning, yeah, that you put pawn on g5 and then knight c6, but then black is really lacking counterplay in this position, yeah, because this bishop f6 idea is not there. You have to maybe somehow defend against knight d4, but then what black is going to do is actually not very clear. Yeah, and white has a very clear plan of advancing pawns. So this might be also not easy to equalize. So all in all, this bishop b4 variation, I'm not very big fan of it, even if white is not pretending for any big advantage, but too many positions where black is at least slightly but suffering. So I think bishop e7 is actually, it's doing pretty well nowadays. It's bishop e7, this classical Scheveningen, of course f4, d6, yeah. So I would advise to play this, but yeah, again, as I mentioned already, the only problem that you need to learn really a lot of theory, even more than maybe than in bishop b4 variation. And in this position, a classical position, white has a choice between two plans. So one is to stop b5, playing a4, but then white is not in time to get his queen to g3. And the second plan is getting immediately the queen to g3, but it gives black the opportunity to play b5, which always, yeah, in such situations is quite favorable for black. So white needs to choose. Let's start with the main classical plan, a4, castles. So the point is that if white is playing queen e1 here, or queen e1, castles a4, then black already manages to take on d4 and play e5. And now, okay, bishop e3 is just equal ef, bishop f4, bishop e6. So many games on this position. Yeah, black is holding quite well here. It's a very typical position in general. Usually in this type of position, white has, well, from very little to nothing usually, most of the time. And the main point of black's play is that after fede, queen g3, black has bishop c5 move. That is important. And after takes on c5, takes with check, king h1, king h8. Now black just wants to develop bishop e6. He has a better structure, and white, can even get worse if he will not do something quickly. But rook takes f6, for instance, this natural sacrifice is enough only for draw. Gf, queen h4, rook g8, and white has nothing better than taking on f6, rook g7, and just to give perpetual. Otherwise, black will be simply better. So this seems to be queen e1 is given just a draw to white. I mean, it's was tried already many times. Of course, it's the most enjoyable for white if he manages both queen on g3 and pawn on a4. Then maybe he would get some chances for opening advantage, but queen e1 doesn't work in this sense because of knight d4 and e5. So then white would usually play king h1 here, actually now trying again to do the same. Now white already wants queen e1 because after in this variation, after knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, e5, fede, queen g3, bishop c5 is already not working. So white insists on trying to play queen e1 next. And now, the classical move is rook e8, and that is what Kasparov played many times, including in his match against Anatoly Karpov. So a lot of games, as usual, Gary was extremely successful with this setup with black, and he more or less developed most of the theory, the general understanding of this system basically was developed by him. But here white at least has some tries. I think the main move is bishop f3. If queen e1, here black have prepared already a different way to face queen e1. I mean the same idea, queen g3, and now you see why rook e8 is played, because black is playing bishop d8, actually already threatening e4, protecting the pawn on e5, and he is having a good game here, no problem for black. So again, rook e8 is prophylactics against queen e1, and white has many moves. Bishop d3 is one of the moves, bishop g1. Almost all legal moves were tried in this position by many top players. I think bishop f3 considers to be the main, the most dangerous move. Anyways, in general, black is holding here, but things are not so easy. And if you want to play this position, you need to study all these classics, games Karpov-Kasparov, and with Anand, Kasparov played with both colors, I believe, this position. So there are a lot of classical high-level games, but I don't know if it's relevant, actually, if it makes sense to study it carefully, because I think lately black found that knight takes this idea of taking on d4, and it seems to me that white was already struggling to find anything here already for 25 years ago, and I've checked the theory now. White is still struggling with the same problem. So maybe knight takes d4 is actually a very simple way to equalize, and then you don't need to know all that big theory, even though anyway, for understanding of Sicilians, it would be very useful for you to check games of Garry Kasparov in this system after rook e8. So knight takes d4, it's simple and direct. The idea is that, of course, if bishop takes d4, then e5, it leads to a similar position. Bishop e3, e4, bishop f4, bishop e6, and again the same story, even maybe a bit more comfortable version for black, because king h1 is already played. So black is in time to go knight d7, queen g3, knight e5. Idea is to meet bishop h6 with knight g6, and it's just an equal position. simply completely equal. Not even slightly better for white, just equal. So, but knight takes d4 was supposed to be not precise because of queen takes d4, and here after e5, first of all, white can play queen d2 simply, and already it's a tempi. It might be an important tempi. Queen is already on d2 because anyways probably black is going to take, and here bishop takes f4, maybe slightly better for white. Also queen b6 has to be checked. This might be also not so easy because takes, yeah, ef4. I don't know if it's anything very special, but maybe a little bit better for white. But I think mainly the idea was that after queen d2, yeah, white gets the next tempi. But then bishop d7 was found. Of course, it's a very logical move. Yeah, I mean, if black bishop gets to c6 here, well, usually they quite easily manage to equalize. But there is e5 move and knight e8. And of course, it looks pretty passive again, but though many games, many tries, many strong players were trying to find something here for white, with white, but for the moment without much success. Actually, black has good statistics. Also, not even modern engines assess it like equal, so they don't see any advantage for white, and so this might be the simplest system to play with black. So all in all, a4 doesn't seem to be a big danger, mainly because of this knight takes d4, queen d4, bishop d7 idea. So then queen e1 is now probably it's more popular actually than a4 because a4 is in crisis. So queen e1, castles, queen g3. So at least like this, white managed his queen on g3. But now black is in time to play b5. Well, first of all, there is a bishop d7 move, which is also not easy to refute. I mean, it's also close to equality, but I think knight takes d4 is doing very well now according to the theory. Bishop takes d4, b5. So here black managed b5, and that is important because in a long run there is always some counterplay connected with b4, or if white's pawn is on a3, then at some point bishop goes to c6, rook b8, a5 before. So black has more chances of counterplay. And again, tactically it works because e5, d5, f5, again, the same motive, bishop c5 black has. So, and usually what happens that sooner or later white is playing a3 because bishop b7 will come, and then b4 is always quite unpleasant strategical threat, I would say. So a3, let's say here, bishop b7, and yeah, this position was considered to be quite dangerous for black many years ago. But now it's, well, computers are very optimistic about black's chances. I mean, of course, black is not even trying to be better. He just wants to equalize, but maybe he's already actually equalized because finally the white's problem that he cannot really find a plan here. I mean, let's say white has different ways of settling his pieces. Let's say rook d1, rook d8. It's very important to put the rook on d8 in this position. Bishop f3, and then black can just stay. Actually, what engines are doing is just nothing with black. So let's say king h8 is a useful move, king h1 the same, and then rook d7. For instance, just after, in case of e5, just that black can double always on d line at some point. But in fact, after rook d3, for instance, looks like a useful move. One of the first lines of engine is rook d8, simply. He just even can simply stay. And actually, it's not clear how white can improve really his position, because if he starts improving, there is always some issue with e4 pawn. Sometimes, most of the time, neither f5, neither e5 is working really. I mean, you can also, I think engines likes to put pawn on h6 in these positions, probably meaning that just in case if white is trying f5, that black can, among other ideas, can play e5, and then the pawn on h6 is always useful against bishop g5. And actually there is no mate in this position. It's very difficult to create real threats for white. So here it's another idea is to try to put bishop on d3, and that is what usually was played before, but now also after rook d8, the same idea. White is actually struggling to manage e5, or even if he manages one day d5, let's say bishop e5, queen just goes somewhere, and black's position is extremely solid. So and quite easy to play, because in the worst case, if you don't see what to do, you just do nothing and wait for white to come with his active plan, which is not really there. Yeah, king h1 is most popular move, but here almost every move was tried. So rook a d8. Well, g6 can be dangerous. f5, e5, bishop e3. So black shouldn't hurry with g6, or maybe not to play it at all. So rook a d8, and again, if rook a1, for instance, rook d7, so just making useful moves and asking white what is his plan, what does he want to do next. And it's not a trivial question. I mean, it's not easy to answer this question, because black always in mind has d5, e5. You know, I mean, white also cannot do anything he wants, because black can start his counterplay at some point. Or bishop c6, queen b7, then a5 b4 might come. Sometimes white even puts a pawn on b4 just to stop this counterplay. But then also there are some weaknesses on the c line. So, and another variation, let's say rook a d1, rook d7, rook d3. This looks like a quite sensible idea, trying to maybe to get the rook on the third rank into attack, but again the question is how. Well, let's say black plays king h8, and again it's difficult to see how exactly white can manage to regroup his pieces, and maybe finally to get the rook on bishop on d3, rook on h3. At least this could start to be really dangerous. But after rook e3, engines, for instance, playing knight e8 here, just trying to change bishops. Next bishop f6. It's very important. You see the rook on d7 is always controlling e5 move, because bishop is hanging and ready to enter on d line once white will open it up. So knight e8, then bishop f6. Well, engines just say equal, like dead equal, this position. Of course, it's not the case, because obviously that it's more comfortable for white still, technically speaking. But in a practical game, it's very difficult to prove that white has any realistic idea to improve his position. So I think it's a very reliable variation, in my opinion. Because, you know, quite often players who play this Taimanov, so they don't want to go to Scheveningen. So there is a certain attitude that I don't play d6 if I play Taimanov. So I try to play always some lines without d6. But here after bishop e2, I think the difference is quite significant. So if you play bishop b4, for instance, here, you're just fighting for a draw with black. You're slightly worse in more than one way, but solid position. No real chance to win, trying to make a draw. Here the theory is not so big. I mean, it used to be huge before this knight takes d4 was found in this position. Yeah, then rook e8 would be a big theory. But here not so much to learn, and frankly I don't see. I mean, maybe in this position you can still try a little bit if you want to play with black, to try to see the games. Again, there were a lot of very strong games of very strong players in this line. But nowadays it's like with years, with every new year, it's easier and easier for black to hold this position, to equalize. So there are not so many resources actually white has here. So that is about all those systems. Then bishop e3, which we are going to consider in the next lesson. So all in all, there are some interesting ideas for white, but especially g3 line, bishop e2, especially if black is not playing Scheveningen but going for bishop b4, that looks pretty pleasant for white, in my opinion. And so you can now I'm talking to white repertoire, to players for whom it's important in the sense of the white repertoire. Definitely it's possible to have g3, bishop e2 in your repertoire, maybe even queen d3, this rare move. I mean, it will be playable, solid, but I think definitely the main move to try to get an advantage in Taimanov system is bishop e3. That's I'm pretty sure about it, that it's most dangerous move, and we are going to study it in the next lesson.